Hello. I will be reading from a book I just made for the occasion, and it's translated by Philip Seil. So if you can send it around, you take one. A concrete poet types a white full stop in Courier in Word on her MacBook Air, prints it off on a sheet of white paper, and called her invisible poem the white full stop. The full stop that an author of a text forgets to place, she thinks to herself, tugs at the surrounding text in the same way as if the writer had remembered to put it in. Just like the 10th planet, known as 2003 UB313, which according to some astronomers circles the Sun in an elliptical orbit at a 45-degree incline to the plane of the 9 major planets of the solar system, and whose invisible threads plucks at those celestial bodies, even though it has yet to be observed through a telescope. The poet wonders if she now holds the world record for the shortest poem. A researcher interested in the phenomenon of difficult poems traces the extent of the problem to the beginning of the last century, when social upheaval suddenly led to an initial epidemic of difficult poetry, manifesting itself in waves of varying intensity throughout history, which neither readers nor poets themselves fully know whether to fear. A reader is assailed by sudden deafness and tinnitus in one ear, and suddenly finds the most annoying thing about poetry reading is precisely the sound of a poet reading aloud. Even more frustrating is the sound of her own voice inside her head as she reads. In order to remove any form of sound, real or imagined, that could ruin poetry, she begins to write poems that should only be looked at, not read. In the second half of the 6th century before Christ, a Greek author, wanting to escape its unpleasant oral hiss, omitted the letter sigma from his ode to the centaurs, and is thus credited as the first author of the lipogram. An author sets out to write a work devoid of images, illusions, representations, figures, characters, composition, references, containing no narrative, effects, quality, associations, symbols, conclusions, and sensationalism, free from author narcissism, pathos, internal jokes, political attitudes, quotes, metaphors, repetitions, transcendence, abstraction, metaphysics, allegories, connotations, myths, drama, climax, concept, meaning, ideology, and history. The work is printed on white paper, inside a white cover, to be read in an empty white room, allowing the reader to concentrate all their attention to the poetic iciness of the work. An author, once considered mediocre, surpasses herself and writes a novel containing such meaningless language material that it draws the reader towards the absolute liberating zero. A researcher maps the bookworm's genome and for obvious reason wants to publish the sequence in book form, to be printed with the same amount of text per volume as the great national encyclopedia. The work will fill 35 folios, which will take the bookworm hundreds of years to devour in a damp basement. A reader stumbles upon an authorless book that is all about itself and its own form and form's ability to produce meaning. After 5 years of the auditorium and the university library, a now fully graduated MA in literary studies is employed by a company's communications department and soon reaches the conclusion that the bulk of all writing is neither literary nor scientific. but rather a world constituting basic element, an enormous mass of informational text consisting of minutes, reports, packaging and advertising texts, business mail, status updates, memos, lists, web pages, manuals, forms, and all sorts of other informational genre hybrids, which we habitually ignore or perhaps skim and archive, and which accumulate and envelop us like some invisible dark matter that somehow interacts with gravity and whose very existence one simply infers through its attractional force on visible matter in offices and supermarkets around the globe. Every day I long to sit in front of my typewriter, thinks a writer, and that's the whole story. The author sits down in front of his typewriter and writes about sitting in front of the typewriter with nothing to say. The published book's cover features the same make and color of his red typewriter. A poet claims that poems are inorganic and don't belong to any dynamic system. His own poems provide proof they never change, never undergo any kind of metamorphosis, and so never die, and need never be buried. A stubborn line of verse generates a valence of self-annihilation in a poet. Having deleted the first line of the poem, she writes the next, which she also deletes. She writes the third line, regrets that too, and continues until the cancelled collection of poems is complete. Thank you.